So, good morning, everyone. Delighted to be with you today. I'm debating whether or not I want to just abandon my presentation and start telling you my life story instead. But I am going to give you something at the beginning, which I hope will stick in the same way that Lucy has done. Normally, I wear a suit. Today, I'm wearing tweed. Why am I wearing tweed? Two reasons. One is because that is what people think of when they think of institutions like Harper Adams. They think about they're in Shropshire, they're in the countryside, I wear Wellingtons every day, I go to work covered in muck, and that's the day-to-day of my life. The other reason is because somebody actually came up and asked me that question. They said, have you stopped wearing suits now you work at Harper Adams? And so I thought, I'm going to wear tweed to reinforce the stereotype, but to remind you that actually some of the problems that we have in terms of anticipating the university of the future is the way in which we limit our imagination by the current. And that's to some extent exactly what Lucy's just said about technology, that we limit our horizons to the current. And unless we are willing to break that, then we will always limit the potential of different institutions. So, this session is going to be a look at institutional mission and purpose. I am going to look at some historical examples, but all of this is to put a background and a backdrop in your head as you start your discussions about universities of the future. So what I'm not going to do is try and come up with a massive big Imagineering piece about what the university of the future is, because if I did that, then I would have just ruined the entire reason you're having the conference today. What I want to do, though, is show some examples of where institutions have gone through that process of thinking about the future based on how they were originally established and where they originally came from. And then the other thing I want to do is give some examples of institutions that have come out of this period. They are the first, they've been established in this period. They've actually been established from a very different starting point to many of the institutions that are in the room. But unusually, I'm going to start by asking you questions. So you might have questions for me at the end, and you can get your revenge on me later, but I'm going to ask you some questions. So how many people in the room currently work in a university or have worked in a university in relatively recent times? Okay, so keep your hands up. How many people in the room would be able to tell me what the point of their university is? And the reason why I'm saying the point of their university is because I don't want to get into an academic discussion about what a mission is, what a purpose is, what a vision is, etc. I just want to know, could you tell me what the point of your university is? Keep your hands up, and now we're going to ask you. So can someone grab a microphone and ask some people? Oh, funnily enough, not quite so many hands are up now. I see. I know who put your hand up. I'll come and find you. So put your hand back up. So what is the point of your university?
Transform lives.
Transform lives. Okay. Another example.
So I'm from Arden University, which is on the screen there.
It
and
is.
We're here to disrupt the marketplace. That's our purpose.
Hi, I'm from Aston University. We've just launched our very ambitious 2030 strategy, and we're about transformational entrepreneurship and inclusivity.
Great, thank you. Can we take Jenny at the back?
Hi, from St George's. Improve human health.
Improve human health. So, what was missing from all of those things? Nobody mentioned the word teaching. Nobody mentioned the word research. Nobody mentioned the word impact. What we mentioned was an organisation that has a fundamental contribution to make to the future of society. So my question is, why is that not the language that we use in our day-to-day discourse? Why is it that when you have a look at promotion criteria, and I'm talking about academic promotions here, that you often see we categorise value based on things which are not the things that you've just told me are the point of the institution? So, of course, there has to be currency. Of course, there has to be transparency. But we are still reluctant to make the move to describe and capture not only our universities, but also how we value ourselves inside our universities based on these fundamental external purposes that we describe day to day. So what I'm going to try and do is give you a couple of examples of where some institutions might have just shifted their focus a bit. I'm going to give some examples of some institutions that have just appeared with a difference of focus, and Arden is one of them, so which I'll mention very briefly. And I hope that will give you at least a backdrop to start thinking about how to reinvent and rethink the model so that we don't limit our potential and our potential for change to just about the boundary that we're comfortable with. Because we need to face up to something. We are not well-liked in general public discourse. We are well-liked in individual discourse. So if you are someone who knows someone who went to university, that all of the polling shows that you ask an individual who knows someone who went to university or went to university, they will talk with positivity about the higher education sector. If you take it to the public layer, and some people appear in both of those boxes, and ask, does the higher education sector deliver value? Does the higher education sector deliver value for money? Does the higher education sector merit more investment in it in order to open that up? Invariably now, polling is negative on that. And we cannot sit here and wait for a government of the day to come up with some sort of rhetoric which is going to change that. I think that's on us. I think that's on institutions. And I think what we need to do is we need to take these really bold statements and words that people are using and actually work through how do we translate that into public discourse and public engagement, which means that that binary and boundary between ourselves and our public are broken down. So these are just some examples of how some universities describe themselves. I'm sure if I went round, I could ask, and you'd probably tell me of some other examples as well. But we need to put the universities into context. What are we operating in? We don't operate in silos. We don't operate in individual areas which are not touched by other things. So all of us are focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's explicitly or implicitly, we are using that as a framework in which we can take our institutions and translate its purpose and its impact. We've got climate change. We are not only researching climate change, teaching about climate change, we're also experiencing climate change. We're seeing the impact of changing climatic conditions on the way in which we operate, on the way in which we think. And also, as we've all experienced, we went through a pandemic, and the pandemic has had a material effect on all of us in that way. I'm not going to repeat all the stuff about AI. Lucy's already covered that. But we are all grappling with, based on the type of institutions we are, the nature of our purpose, how are we actually going to address the potential and the future of AI in our sector. And the other thing that we have is constant migration. We've got climate-based migration, we've got war-based migration, we've got poverty-based migration, which is affecting different parts of the world in different ways. And we as universities are not only intellectualizing that, but we're grappling with that practically and seriously. But I want to just think back a little bit when you talk about universities and think how universities have been described over the years. So think about this in relation to how Arden described itself just before. So groups of scholars congregate at the ancient Roman trading posts at Cambridge for the purpose of study. The most definitive statement of exclusion ever. So both in terms of its definition, in terms of its catchment and focus. But that's where, and there are other examples from similar periods. I went to the University of Glasgow, and the University of Glasgow would have something very similar to say about itself. Let's jump forward to Monash University, which is where I was. So this was born of a very radical period. This was the post-war period, the early 1960s, and the most revolutionary thing that the university had at that moment in time was that lectures should not be compulsory. So post-war period, new model of education, new model of thinking, but to some extent, not fundamental rethinking. And maybe that's because of limitations of time or various other things, but the reality of it is that it was a variation on a very similar thing. If you flash forward to the University of Warwick, and this is a really interesting one for me. This was a time of rebuilding and rejuvenation by the city of Coventry. It was an imaginative partnership of city and county. So when I was at Warwick in the 90s, going into the 2000s, we were continually criticised for a lack of engagement with our city and our region. And a lot of work was then done. So what happened? What happened that the fundamental purpose that led to that university, and this isn't me picking on Warwick, I'm a graduate of Warwick and was there for 20 years, I'm not about to do that, but something happened to the nature of who we were, that we started with a definition of public, and then we became something else, and we started to be, and I think that's something that's the case in a number of institutions. Let's go even further forward, Open University, but not dissimilar time. We are open first to people. We are open as to places. We are open as to methods. We are open finally to ideas. But it's interesting, in recent years, the Open University has had a debate about being a place-based institution. So this fundamental open access institution has had meaningful conversations as to whether or not it needs to be a place-based institution as well as other aspects of what it does. And again, it's an example of where the primary purpose was defined in the eyes and the constituency of people. And yet, even in these examples, sometimes they can be seen to have pulled the drawbridge up in the direction of certain communities. An even more recent, but now historical example, 2016, Dyson Institute of Engineering. It is estimated that Britain will be short of engineers by 2025. A traditional approach is not going to cut it. So the starting purpose of this institution is nothing stated about teaching and research. It's about populating the engineering profession and everything that's there. So what you would hope, and in fact it is the case, that the organisation of the institution and the way in which they approach their teaching and research and knowledge exchange is with that in mind. And there are other examples which I could refer to. And then, how is Dyson Institute different? First and foremost, one of the questions I've got in the back of my mind is whether or not this mono use of the word university has in itself caused part of the problem. So we had a diversity of institution, and now we have a thing called university. And university covers a whole category, difference of categories of different places. But what has been the consequence of that? Has that led people in their institutions to retain their distinctiveness, or has it led to conformity? And if it has led to conformity, then if there are examples of where that's the case, that conformity was based on an exclusionary model, because it was based on a model when a minority of people were going to higher education. So one of the things I'm asking myself when I think about this, and this session is basically me doing my thinking with you in front of you and then hopefully engaging you in it later, that have we, through the legislation which has changed to the model of university, actually limited the effects of, that we can have on society and created a greater degree of detachment, regardless of the percentage of students that have gone into education. So Dyson is different. It's a working institution. It's focused entirely on making sure that it's got employable graduates that are useful to the sectors that it actually wants to be in. And therefore, all of the organisation of education is around that as a principle. There's no evidence anywhere which says that the quality of teaching is any lower than anywhere else in the country. In fact, far from it. There are plenty of examples to show that it has outstanding teaching. But it has started with a purpose, it's held that purpose, and it's defined that purpose. So I think over time, institutions like Dyson will find it easier to describe their purpose in a way that engages the public than potentially more general universities that have come from a particular history. And I'm deliberately trying to provoke this so that when you go into your group sessions, you'll actually think that through. So let's think about Cambridge. We were talking about 1209. So what does Cambridge do now? Cambridge has got a foundation programme. And who does it affect? Firstly, it's free and fully funded. So the students who get to go on it get to access it with no financial implication. 71% of the students who go on that program are now going into the first year at Cambridge. It's a direct intervention at tackling disruption. If you went back into the 90s, too often institutions saw it as the problem of the community, and they went into the community to try and do something about it, as opposed to pulling that community into the institution and using the things and using the tools and using the expertise to transform it. Of course, there are lots and lots of examples all over the country where people did something similar. Warwick introduced the 2+2 program, a part-time degree program, to try and do the same thing. But did it genuinely shift the dial? That's an open question. I think this is an example of an institution based on a particular purpose with a primary set of focus, but is doing direct intervention to change the path of who comes into the institution and why. The Anglia Ruskin University in Peterborough, low skill levels, high levels of unemployment, but huge number of industries around it. The pace at which this has gone in terms of decision making and implementation is breathtaking, actually. Now, I'm sure if Ross was here, he would tell me that actually the original decision took forever to take, but from the point at which that decision was being ready to be put forward, the rate at which that has happened, this is an intentional intervention. This is an institution which has public at its heart. If you follow ARU Peterborough on LinkedIn or anywhere else, you will see nearly every day there is something about the public. There is something about the outside world. Often, the time that's been put into building the institution was around community engagement, public engagement, industry engagement. I asked the question, if I was there at the time when Warwick was established, was that the case? Was that a genuine, comprehensive conversation, and would that have continued in that way? I would hope it would be the case, but I couldn't be certain. And then we've got different types of model universities that are coming through at the moment. So we've got Arden again, and Arden with its disruptive tendencies, its scale, its private effect on it in terms of how it's organised, how it's governed, etc. But on a number of significant indices, Arden is progressing at pace and is doing well in the sector. The International School of Agri-Management. So this is a self-defined institution which is based in Spain. It only offers 2 courses. The same courses are offered either full-time and online. They're done in parallel. Students and employees can switch between the different modes seamlessly between it. It didn't exist 4 years ago. It does exist now. And it's recruiting well, and it's now looking how it's going to expand its portfolio. But it starts from a principle of not behaving from what it thinks a conventional university behaves like. Am I here to say that those conventional institutions and the more historical institutions are a problem? Of course not. Absolutely not. They have an amazing and immense contribution to make, and they do, and we should value it. What I'm saying, though, is the shape of the sector is changing, and this is an opportunity for the whole sector. It's an opportunity for the whole sector to think about, 1, how to question its purpose and how to use it as a mode of engagement. 2, how to think about connecting across those things. But 3, don't use the traditional model of university to limit or question or sometimes belittle alternative models. The shape of the sector is changing, and what we do is changing, and we should embrace that, and we should feel comfortable with that, and I think there's increasing evidence that we can. You've got NMITE in Herefordshire, New Model of Institute for Technology and Engineering. I was involved in some discussions at Warwick many years ago when that idea was coming forward. Really informed by Olin College of Engineering in the US. Olin College had one main priority, which was to address the underrepresentation of women in the engineering workforce. It made a decision that it was going to change the way policies were developed. So instead of having a policy and then reviewing it periodically, policies would end after year 3. The assumption was, if you wrote a policy in 1 year and it was the same policy slightly tweaked in 3 years, then it's unlikely to be relevant for the challenge that you were set up to do today. How many of us in institutions would fundamentally say that we would go back to our policies and say, right, okay, let's have another look, let's have a go. In fact, I know from the institutions I've been in that there's often a reluctance to have that full external review of what that is. So are we actually causing for ourselves an issue and a dislocation of time between the impact we could have and the impact we do have, just because we're not willing to ask the question and question ourselves in that particular way? And then the top one in the middle is a thing called Station Quarter, which is being built in Telford, and Station Quarter, which will have a name as a thing sometime soon. But that is Harper Adams University, Telford College, the local council, businesses, and an incubation space for entrepreneurship. Now, I've been at Harper for 2 years. Harper has been in one location for over 120 years. And now it's going to have a second location. In fact, by the end of next year, it's going to have a third location. I think these questions are what we need to ask ourselves in terms of building a bridge between ourselves and the public if we really want those things to change and we want the appetite and political appetite to shift and to change. And I am sure, and I'm hoping shortly, when I open it up to discussion, that you will tell me that what I'm presenting is something that's slightly out of date. I'm hoping you're going to tell me that most universities are already doing that internal challenge on how to narrow the gap between the sense of being public and the sense of being an institution. I've said overtly to Harper Adams, I want to turn the main university campus into a place of public engagement which hosts a university, not a university that does public engagement, because it makes it a choice. I want all of our decision making to be driven by the notion of how does the public see it, how does the public understand it, and how does the public benefit from it. And I'm hoping by doing that that we can narrow the gap between the institution and its local population and other areas that are there. So there are lots and lots of new models that are coming through, and that's interesting to see. What I am going to show shortly are 2 videos, one from Monash University and one from Harper Adams University. And I can say that the Harper Adams video was influenced by the Monash one because I was involved in the Monash one and then I moved to Harper Adams. But you'll see there's something fundamentally different about them. I would not get away with the Monash video at Harper Adams. So see what happens when context comes together. But essentially, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to present and represent their institutions fundamentally as a place where collaboration happens, openness happens, and that things change and impact can be had. So I had a conversation with some senior leaders recently, and someone actually said this: we have survived this long. What is the problem? So there was a sense in that room, it's to some extent similar to what Lucy said earlier. There was a sense that we're in a period that we just need to ride out. Of course, there are going to be individual institutions that will do things differently. Of course, there are going to be new institutions which will shake it up a bit and make things a bit different. But fundamentally, hold on, it's not going to change. And to some extent, Lucy alluded to that earlier when she talked about the technology side. I think that some of these references to higher education are things that are worth listening to. So a new model of education called the 21K School, which is an international organisation, starting to describe the issue of pace and the difference in pace between being in research and being an organisation. So how many of us are working in institutions where we are delivering things for industry and for society that we are not implementing ourselves? How many institutions talk to their own business school about prioritising how they develop as an institution, yet those business schools are out there talking to lots and lots of different organisations? The one that really got me, though, was the third one, which was the notion of universities becoming glorified human resource departments. The notion that we are in effect, and have some colleagues here, a glorified search and selection service. Our job is to basically shake the talent pool in society, admit some of it, show what it's good at, and hand it over to industry. That has to be fundamentally concerning. And that's why, when we talk about employability and we talk about impact, we have to infuse it into how we talk about education and research. Otherwise, the risk is it's seen as separate and it's seen as different. I think we still have work to do to provide a compelling narrative to society at large that we are focused on the improvement of society, the improvement of the economy, the improvement of people's life experiences, and also the improvement of people's prospects to be able to get a job. Another phrase I heard in that session was, well, it's all fine because we understand it, we've got the message, it's all about impact now. That sentence is the concerning bit. It's all about impact now. It's almost as if we've had all of this public investment over, in some cases, many decades, and only now we're thinking about impact. Well, University of Warwick was set up to have impact and can arguably say it has had impact. So to some extent, our own language about ourselves is part of the barrier that we create with other people. And it's 20 years ago this year that Richard Lambert did his report on universities and businesses. And in that, he talks about the third leg. But again, the third leg separates it, and I spoke to Richard recently about this, separates it from teaching and research. It doesn't make teaching and research the means. It makes teaching and research the end, and impact and translation is another end. My question to you, as you go into your discussions today, is that good enough in the university of the future? Is that going to shift political opinion? Is that going to shift public opinion? My argument is no. I think that we have to be able to show how that impact, that public purpose, that public demonstration of value is infused through the core of what we do, which is education and research. If we detach it, it will be seen as a byproduct. And it doesn't matter if it isn't in the institution. If we detach it, we just invite people to see it as a byproduct, and we don't need to. We're all doing far too much impact-based work for that to be the case, and there should be more positivity about the sector than there is at the moment, and we cannot just blame the government. We cannot say that it's only the government's narrative that's leading to this. I think in part it's our narrative that's leading to it, and I think we need to think through that. So in Australia, having gone through a period with a government that was arguably anti-university, and that's no longer a controversial statement, I think it's a statement of fact, the Labour government in Australia has established this process which is called the Building of a University Accord. And what it is saying is if universities wish to have a future which is well supported by the state and well supported by society in general, then there has to be a reconnection, a new conversation about what the role of universities is in society. And it cannot just be something that universities do and say for themselves. And then you've got Jay Grant, who this year talks in a very similar way about the UK system and says, how do we get ourselves into a position where we're no longer fighting the culture war battles, the minority issue battle that is being absolutely exaggerated through the media and through some aspects of government statements and government policy. How do we get to a fundamental reconnection to the purpose of higher education, the future of society, and how improvement and growth and development comes as a result of it? So I think if we are thinking about the university of the future, I think it's really important that we don't only think about the individual institutions, we think about the collective institution and the collective purpose. I think we've got to ask ourselves the question, how do we narrow the gap? We may be close to our local people. We may have real deep connections in our local environment. I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of examples in the room where that's the case. But that does not necessarily translate into a public perception of value. And unless the public are seeing a perception of value, then it's highly likely that the politicians will not see the priority that we believe we can bring. It should be given and the value that we can give. So, hopefully, if I press a button, you're going to see 2 videos in a second. And I realized very quickly the only reason I got a Vice-Chancellor's job was to keep me away from the technology, because in my previous job I had a habit of breaking it, but hopefully this will work. So this is Monash's brand campaign, which is called "If You Don't Like It, Change It."
This bomb shit, my yield, these bones up, what time here? It's my time, how that feel? Yeah, the big bully built the wall. Yeah, the big bully killed them all. Huffing and puffing, they blew it. I don't get stuck, I get through it. Y'all step off when I step in. Check out when I check in. Them big bucks in the business of blood. They can't even tell when the shit from the mud. Blackout. We pulled the plug. Y'all feel that? Said no I don't, said no I don't, said no I don't believe. Don't believe. Said no I don't, said no I don't, said no I don't believe. Don't believe. Said no I don't, said no I don't, said no I don't believe. Don't believe. Said no I don't believe that. Y'all feel that?
So I had a period of time away from Monash because I had a spinal injury. The first day I went out from my spinal injury, I went to the cinema and I saw that. Now, I knew it was coming because I was part of the group that advised on it. But the impact of that and the message of that was very much about saying that this isn't about what universities do. It's about what universities are for, and a direct relationship, and then infusing, as I said before, the teaching, learning, and research into it. So here's a slightly calmer version. Oh, by the way, I think Monash knew it had managed to do something successful when the first piece of correspondence it got was from the then education minister, who questioned whether or not a university should be advocating for violence. And the response that the university sent back was, if you've watched the whole video, you'll see that we're actually not advocating for violence. It's the violence that's already there that we're trying to address. So, So a slightly calmer way of representing a very similar point, which is to not only remind the students who come to the university, the staff who are there, the governors who govern us, the partners who work with us, but society in general, that our primary focus as a university is on the fact that the system does not deliver enough food to people. And yet, I can still go into rooms and people can say, do you wear tweed? Or do you still wear your suit? So that's what I mean about narrowing the gap between our understanding of how the public sees us and how the public understanding is of how it actually sees us. And I think that we have got a job to do, and I think that the University of the Future needs to do a better job at it. So my takeaways to think about, and then I'm going to ask you for either questions or reflections, are simply these. So are education and research the means to the end, or are they the end? So are they how we do things, or are they what we do? I would argue that sometimes we overemphasize the what and not the how, the what and not the why. So I think there's more to do about seeing them as the means to the end and describing the end in more compelling ways. Is the whole purpose of engagement a primary purpose, or a third purpose, or just another purpose at the university? And that's for you to discuss and for you to debate on. There is a fundamental question: how do we regain some political priority when you've got such compelling areas like health and school-aged education and other types of education? How do we get back into the political conversation so we can have something about sustainable funding? I think the University of the Future has to position itself to stay in that space and to have that constructive engagement with government, which we haven't had. What models will come? Some of the models that I've talked about today, no one would have thought they were going to be here a decade ago. There will be more models. The sector will look different. The shape and size will look different. Who feels confident you know what you're going to be doing in 20 years? I know, certainly I don't. I'm not entirely sure I know exactly what the university will be doing in 5 years' time. But what it does say is that preparing of the culture to embrace and support the development of change and mission and purpose is as important as what we do. Because otherwise, as Lucy said before, we will not get the full benefit of technology. We will not get the full benefit of opportunities that are there. And my final point is simply to say that I think it is time for an optimist charter. I am an optimist by nature. I like to see the upside of things. But if you were to have a look at those existential moments and those existential factors, it could be feeling like a really heavy time to work in higher education like it is in other sectors. But we have, within our means, the ability to not only shape and influence the future in the way that we do, but actually narrow the gap in terms of perception and understanding. And I hope that is something that we will rise to the challenge and will step up and do. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to, just in my last 5 minutes or so, ask if anyone's got any questions or any comments, or if anyone wants to simply just jump up and say, I don't agree with any of it. And then I can at least say to the Office for Students, I've encouraged academic freedom and freedom of speech. So, in fact, if someone would just get up and say that, then it's on video and then everything's fine. So. And if you say who you are and where you're from, please.
Thank you. Hi, Torian Smith, Soms Consulting. I'd be really keen to get your view on how do you see the balance between so-called, quote-unquote, academic disciplines and so-called, quote-unquote, applied disciplines? Does that difference between them even matter? Is there even a barrier, boundary?
So, to some extent, at some point, fundamental will translate into applied in some way. It will either apply in its own discipline or it will apply in society in a way which can be realised. And I think that's one of the things that I think the sector has struggled with as well, and it's not just unique to the UK, it's other places as well, which is why are we making this a trade-off between the notion of fundamental and applied and in that particular way? Because we're creating a space for a question of value to come in the reason we have the technology now is because some people invested in fundamental research in the 1950s. We're now starting to realize the benefits of things that have been in our society in some places in a long-standing way. So I hope that we can get away from this notion of value and question in that way. And the reason why I say that is because I'm concerned that we will only then focus on applied. And the incentive will be to focus on short-run applied interventions that come as a result of what we do. And society will be a less healthy, less vibrant, less economically successful place to grow up and be born into if that's the case. And again, I think, I do wonder whether some of that is our own doing. I think we talk about it. Again, I'm sharing some of the things that it said. Someone asked me the question, you worked at two serious universities and now you're heading up Harper Adams University. That was from within the sector. That's not from outside the sector. So, we have to recognize the different contributions and different roles that institutions play, and we have to be willing to value them. Because ultimately, whether it's fundamental, whether it's applied, it will end up in the application somewhere.
I'll make my way there.
Hello. So my comment is in relation to PhDs and DBAs. Why does there need to be a barrier between the two? So in traditional academic environments, the research student either does the PhD or they do the DBA.
Yeah.
Now, that seems to be the split between the two of the academic environment against the inclusion, professional environment and what can be added to society. Now, a lot of the PhDs do not end up in practical applications, and practical applications don't deliver into academic theory. Should there really be that split between how we actually teach those subjects? Should there be more inclusion of both elements into the delivery of a doctoral program that would actually help the environment, society, but also at the same time develop us as a university?
So I agree, and in fact I would say the research councils agree in many respects, because some of the interventions they've made in the last decade have been to include within the doctoral experience some of the stuff that would naturally go into something like a DBA. I think, again though, the fundamental question is one of value and one of recognition. So if I go to Monash University, and again I was asked this the question, so I carry the title of professor, and yet I am not a researcher or an educator. And so someone asked me whether that makes me an honorary professor. It doesn't make me an honorary professor, it makes me a practice professor. So in Monash University there are four routes to become a senior academic or are seen to be in their academic community, and one of those routes is practice. So you can, through the work you do, the contributions you make in your organisation, outside the organisation, present yourself as a case for recognition at professorial standard, but you're not claiming to be an eminent world researcher. The criteria are different. The fundamental thing, though, is Monash is recognising all of them. So Monash isn't saying that there is a group over here which are the real professors, and then there's this group over here that we just give a title to. What they're saying is the university needs expertise to the highest level in a range of different ways, and we are going to recognise it. And I think if there was more of that in the UK system, then this binary, I don't think it would matter which route you went through. I think the perception of value would be the same. So I think in that space there is progress to be made.
Andrea Bolshaw from Leeds Beckett University. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Andrea.
Thank you for that. It was really stimulating. I wondered if you could give me your views about the key leadership capabilities to realise some of the things that you've talked about.
Okay. Thank you for a nice challenge at the end. So I think there's several things. One is to realise that leadership is nothing if it's not distributed. So if you get into a role like this one and you think leadership is all about you, then you're not only going to overstate your own significance, you're also going to significantly understate the potential of people within the institution. I was in a session at Wonky yesterday, and I was talking about when we talk about our students, we know that our students are likely to come in with a more confident understanding of technology than we are. And that's going to continually happen over a period of time. When we talk to students, we're happy to see students as leaders in that because we're happy to listen to them and engage them. But I asked the question yesterday, do we create a leadership model in which we could accept that some of our most junior colleagues are the most expert colleagues that the institution needs for its future? I'm not convinced they are. I speak to too many junior and middle people who say, I have got ideas and thoughts, and I don't get the opportunity to share them because my level dictates my level of expertise, when actually in some of these things, I know more than the people who are actually making the decision. So I think we've got to think about how do we create those lines of sight through the organisation. I also think that it is a time for, and it's overstated in some ways, but it is a time for a degree of vulnerability and empathy in leadership. People are going through exceptionally challenging times. And I'll end with just one story from a TED event I went to at the University of Warwick. And it stuck with me. It was about 15 years ago. And an academic who was giving a talk asked me to come, which I thought was very nice. And then he asked me to sit in a particular seat, which then roused my suspicions. But he knew me, I knew him, it was absolutely fine. So he got up and he did a talk about failure. And he said, as an academic, I am a serial failure because most of the things I try do not work, and I am continually yearning to find the solution that will work. So every day, I have to go home and face my children and say to them, I did not achieve anything I was intending to achieve today other than accrue another failure on the road to success, hopefully. And then suddenly this bright light appeared over my head. And he said, but he's not like that because he's a senior manager of the institution and every day is a good day. And so I was just sitting there thinking, no, it isn't. That's absolutely rubbish. And what he was talking about is what happens when you get overtaken by corporate communications, where you start to only use words which are seen to be on brand or of a particular type. You lose that personal dialogue from the person. So, and I've seen it in some cases where you'll go into a room and you'll hear a particular person, and then when you read what they say and what they put out into the public space, it's a very, very different place. So I think if we want institutions and we want the people in institutions to step up and through with us on these fundamental shifts and changes, and particularly those who are in vulnerable employment and other situations like that, we've got to show that our days are not made up of perfection. They're not made up of everything going according to plan. And just for the avoidance of doubt, I can 100% confirm that not every day is a perfect day. And I'm sure if I reached out to Jenny at the back, she would probably agree the same. That we face challenges, we face uncertainties, we face questions, we face risks, we face all of those things. I think we need to spend more time explaining that and showing that so that people can then have the courage to realise that they can try too. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.